In the crisp morning air outside Wilson's grocery, a small folding table stood like a beacon of hope. Behind it sat 12-year-old Sarah Manning, her thin frame wrapped in a warm sweater despite the mild weather. Her bright blue beanie couldn't quite hide the absence of hair underneath, a telling sign of her ongoing chemotherapy. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't her illness, it was her smile. "Would you like to try my grandmother's cookies?" she would ask each passerby, her voice carrying a strength that belied her fragile appearance. The cookie stand had become a fixture over the past few weeks, with its hand-drawn sign and carefully arranged plates of homemade treats. Each cookie was wrapped individually in clear cellophane, tied with a small blue ribbon, the color of childhood cancer awareness. From a nearby bench, Sarah's mother, Rebecca, watched with a mixture of pride and concern. Her daughter's determination was inspiring, but she could see the fatigue setting in as the morning wore on. The slight tremor in Sarah's hands as she handed over change, the way she would occasionally close her eyes for just a moment too long, signs that only a mother would notice. Sarah had insisted on setting up her stand 6 days a week, taking only Sundays off for her treatments. "Mom, I can't miss a single opportunity," she had argued. "Every cookie sold is another step closer." Rebecca couldn't argue with that logic, even though her heart ached watching her little girl shoulder such adult responsibilities. The morning crowd brought the usual mix of reactions. Some hurried past, avoiding eye contact, perhaps uncomfortable with the visible signs of Sarah's illness. Others stopped, purchased a cookie or two, offering encouraging words and gentle smiles. A few regular customers had become familiar faces, checking in on Sarah's progress, and always insisting on paying more than the asking price. "These cookies are worth at least twice what you're charging," one elderly woman would say every Tuesday morning, pressing an extra 20 into Sarah's hand. Sarah would protest, but the woman would just wink and walk away, leaving the young girl with a mixture of gratitude and determination to make even better cookies next time. As the morning sun climbed higher, Sarah's energy began to wane. Her mother could see it in the way her shoulders slumped slightly, how her bright sales pitch became just a bit quieter. But Sarah refused to take breaks, saying she couldn't afford to miss even one potential customer. Each sale meant another dollar toward her treatment, another small victory in her battle against cancer. The cookie recipe itself had become a symbol of hope. Her grandmother had passed it down just before she lost her own battle with cancer 2 years ago. "These cookies brought joy to everyone who tasted them," she had told Sarah, "and sometimes joy is the best medicine." Now, Sarah felt like each batch she baked was a connection to her grandmother, a way of keeping her memory alive while fighting her own battle. Between customers, Sarah would carefully count her earnings, updating the small notebook where she tracked every sale. The numbers were growing, but so slowly compared to the mounting medical bills. Still, she remained optimistic, telling her mother, "Every journey starts with a single step, right?" "Well, mine starts with a single cookie." Most people didn't know that Sarah had been up since 5 that morning, helping to bake the day's batch despite her fatigue. They didn't see how she would sometimes have to steady herself against the table when dizziness hit, or how she kept her medication in a small lunchbox beneath her chair, carefully timed throughout the day. The regulars who frequented Wilson's grocery had watched her setup become more professional over the weeks. What started as just a card table with paper plates had evolved into a proper display with a tablecloth, professional-looking price signs, and even a small chalkboard listing the day's special flavors. Sarah had reinvested some of her earnings into making her stand look more appealing, understanding that presentation mattered. It was approaching noon now, and Sarah's mother could see the telltale signs of exhaustion becoming more pronounced. The slight pallor under her daughter's otherwise bright eyes, the way she had to take deeper breaths between sentences. But Sarah's spirit remained unbroken. When a young child pointed at her beanie and asked why she didn't have hair, Sarah simply smiled and said, "Sometimes you have to be brave to become stronger, and this is part of my brave journey." The morning crowd had begun to thin, but Sarah showed no signs of wanting to pack up early. Each person who passed by represented potential hope, another chance to inch closer to her goal. Her mother watched as she straightened the cookie display for the 100th time, adjusting each package until it was just right, ready for whoever might stop by next. Little did Sarah know that this ordinary Tuesday was about to become extraordinary, as fate had decided to send an unexpected customer her way, someone whose simple act of kindness would change not just her life, but the lives of countless others. But for now, she simply sat at her table, counting her blessings one cookie at a time, unaware that her biggest blessing was about to walk through Wilson's Groceries parking lot. The moment that changed everything had seemed so ordinary at first. Just another routine checkup, just another doctor's appointment that Sarah's parents had scheduled after she complained of feeling unusually tired. No one expected the doctor's face to grow serious as he examined the test results, or for words like leukemia and immediate treatment to shatter their world in an instant. The Manning family had always been careful with money. David, Sarah's father, worked as a high school teacher, while Rebecca balanced part-time bookkeeping with caring for Sarah and her younger brother, Tommy. They had savings, good insurance, and thought they were prepared for life's unexpected turns. But no one is ever truly prepared for the tsunami of medical bills that follows a cancer diagnosis. It started with the smaller things: co-pays, prescription medications, specialized diet requirements. Then came the bigger expenses: testing, treatments, specialized care consultations. Each new bill seemed to carry another zero at the end, each statement marked with red, urgent stamps that felt like they were printed in Sarah's parents' mounting anxiety. Late one night, when Sarah was supposed to be sleeping, she heard her parents' hushed voices from the kitchen. The walls in their modest home had always been thin, but that night they seemed particularly transparent. "We could take out a second mortgage," her father was saying, his voice strained with worry. "The house still has some equity." Her mother's response was barely a whisper, but Sarah could hear the tears in it. The next morning, Sarah noticed how her father's coffee cup shook slightly in his hand as he reviewed another stack of medical bills at the breakfast table. She watched him circle numbers, make calculations in the margins, then crumple the paper in frustration before smoothing it out again. Her mother kept glancing at him with concern, trying to distract Tommy with cartoons so he wouldn't notice the tension. Insurance covered a portion, but the portion they were left with still felt insurmountable. The terms out-of-pocket maximum and deductible became regular parts of their vocabulary. Sarah learned to recognize the distinctive look of medical bills in the mail. They always came in the same sterile white envelopes with blue trim, like harbingers of more financial stress. The changes in their daily lives were subtle but significant. Her father started taking extra tutoring sessions after school. Her mother picked up more bookkeeping clients, often working late into the night at their kitchen table. Family movie nights at the theater became movie nights at home. Restaurant dinners became home-cooked meals. Every penny saved was another penny for treatment. Sarah noticed how her mother would linger in the grocery store aisles, comparing prices, calculating costs, putting items back on the shelves with a quiet sigh. The organic fruits she used to buy without thinking were now carefully weighed against their conventional counterparts. Even Tommy's favorite cereals were replaced with store brands, though their parents tried to pour them into the name brand boxes so he wouldn't notice. The worst part wasn't the bills themselves. It was watching her parents try to hide their worry. They maintained bright smiles during her treatments, telling her everything would be fine, that they would figure it out. But Sarah saw how her mother's eyes would dart to the billing office during hospital visits, how her father's shoulders would tense when the phone rang. One particularly difficult evening, Sarah overheard her father on the phone with her grandmother, his voice cracking as he explained their situation. "We're looking at another round of treatment," he was saying. "The doctors say it's necessary, but—" His voice trailed off, and Sarah heard the unmistakable sound of a grown man trying not to cry. The medical bills arrived with ruthless regularity, each one a reminder of the cost of hoping, the price tag attached to survival. Sarah began to understand why some of the other kids in the pediatric ward sometimes disappeared, their families unable to continue treatment. The thought terrified her, not for herself, but for what it was doing to her parents. That's when Sarah started paying more attention to numbers. She noticed the cost of each treatment, each medication. She began to understand the weight of the words copay and out-of-network. The numbers seemed impossible. How could saving a life cost so much? The unfairness of it all struck her with particular force one night as she watched her mother sort bills into piles: urgent, can wait, and maybe next month. But Sarah Manning wasn't one to be defeated by impossible numbers. As she lay in bed that night, listening to her parents' voices drift up from the kitchen, something shifted inside her. The weight of those medical bills, instead of crushing her spirit, became the foundation for an idea. If her parents were doing everything they could to save her life, then she would do everything she could to help them. The solution, when it came to her, seemed almost too simple. But sometimes the best ideas are the simplest ones, born from necessity and love. As she drifted off to sleep, her grandmother's cookie recipe floated through her mind, and with it, the first glimmer of hope they'd had in months. The idea came to Sarah like a whisper of her grandmother's voice, gentle but insistent. She remembered countless afternoons in her grandmother's kitchen, the warmth of the oven making the windows fog up as batch after batch of cookies emerged, golden and perfect. Her grandmother had always said that love was the secret ingredient, but Sarah knew there was more to it: precise measurements, perfect timing, and a blend of spices that made these cookies unlike any other. It started as a simple suggestion at the breakfast table. "Mom, what if we sold Grandma's cookies?" The words tumbled out between bites of toast, causing her parents to pause mid-conversation. Her father lowered his coffee cup, exchanging glances with her mother. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Everyone always said they were the best cookies they'd ever tasted. Remember how people at church would fight over the last one?" At first, her parents tried to gently dissuade her. "Honey, you need to focus on getting better," her mother said softly. But Sarah was prepared. She'd spent the night planning, calculating, dreaming. She pulled out a carefully written list of expenses and potential profits, written in her neat schoolgirl handwriting with colorful highlights, marking important points. Her father, the teacher in him showing, couldn't help but be impressed by her organization. "The ingredients aren't expensive," Sarah explained, pointing to her calculations. "And Grandma always said the secret was in the love, not the fancy stuff." She had even worked out that each batch would cost less than $10 to make, but could sell for much more, especially if people knew the cause. Her parents' resistance began to crumble in the face of her determination. The first batch was a learning experience. Sarah insisted on doing as much as she could herself, though her mother helped with the heavy mixing in the hot oven. The kitchen filled with the familiar scent of butter, vanilla, and their secret spice blend. As the first cookies cooled on the rack, Sarah's hands trembled slightly from fatigue, but her eyes shone with pride. Word spread quickly in their small community. Sarah's cookie stand, initially just a card table borrowed from the garage, became a regular fixture outside Wilson's grocery. The owner, Mr. Wilson himself, had been a friend of her grandmother's and immediately gave permission when Sarah asked about setting up shop. "Ellen's cookies were legendary," he said, his eyes misting slightly at the memory. "It's about time someone brought them back." Not everyone was supportive at first. Some people hurried past, avoiding eye contact. Others questioned whether a sick child should be handling food, despite Sarah's careful attention to hygiene and proper food handling procedures. A few even suggested it was inappropriate for a child to be raising money this way. But Sarah persevered, her grandmother's recipe becoming her shield against doubt and criticism. The cookies themselves seemed to carry a hint of magic. Classic chocolate chip, snickerdoodles dusted with cinnamon, oatmeal raisin that converted even the staunchest raisin haters. Each variety was carefully crafted according to her grandmother's exacting standards. Sarah added her own touch too, keeping a notebook of customer preferences and adjusting her daily selection accordingly. Local mothers began stopping by regularly, picking up cookies for after-school snacks. Business people on their lunch breaks would grab a few for the office. Even the skeptics eventually came around, won over by the quality of the cookies and Sarah's unwavering optimism. Each sale was carefully recorded in her notebook, every dollar bringing her closer to her goal. The stand became more than just a fundraising effort. It became Sarah's way of maintaining normalcy in a life that had been turned upside down by illness. On days when she felt strong enough, working at the stand gave her a sense of purpose. She wasn't just a cancer patient, she was a business owner, a baker, her grandmother's legacy keeper. Tommy, initially disappointed that his sister's baking efforts meant fewer cookies for him at home, became her passionate advocate. He would tell anyone who would listen about how his sister made the best cookies in the whole world. His enthusiasm was infectious, leading to several bulk orders from his teachers and his friends' parents. As the weeks passed, Sarah's cookie stand evolved. She added seasonal specialties, took custom orders for small events, and even started offering sugar-free varieties for diabetic customers. Each adaptation came from listening to her customers, understanding their needs, and maintaining the high standards her grandmother had instilled in her. The money wasn't flowing in as quickly as the medical bills arrived, but it was something. More importantly, it was something Sarah could control in a situation where so much was beyond her control. Each cookie sold was a small victory. Each satisfied customer, a reminder that she was more than her illness. Little did Sarah know that her modest cookie stand was about to catch the attention of someone who would change everything. But for now, she focused on what she could do, measuring ingredients carefully, timing each batch perfectly, and greeting every customer with the same warm smile that had made her grandmother's kitchen such a special place. The morning had started like any other at Sarah's cookie stand. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of her freshly baked goods across Wilson's Grocery's parking lot. Regular customers came and went, each adding a few dollars to her collection, each offering warm words of encouragement. But no one could have predicted how this ordinary Tuesday would transform into something extraordinary. It was just past 11 when the black SUV pulled into the parking lot. The windows were tinted, and the vehicle moved with a quiet precision that seemed out of place in their small town. A few heads turned as it parked in a spot near the store entrance, but Sarah was too busy arranging her cookie display to notice. The man who stepped out of the SUV didn't draw immediate attention. Dressed in casual clothes, jeans, a simple jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low, he could have been any other shopper. But there was something about his presence, a quiet authority in the way he moved, that made him stand out to those who were paying attention. Clint Eastwood had come to Wilson's Grocery for a simple reason. Filming locations for his latest project had brought him to this small town, and he'd heard about a local grocery store that stocked a particular brand of coffee he preferred. He hadn't expected to find anything else of interest, but the small cookie stand caught his eye as he walked toward the entrance. He paused, observing the scene before him. The young girl behind the table was clearly ill. The telltale signs of chemotherapy were visible, but there was a determination in her posture that stirred something in him. He watched as she interacted with customers, her enthusiasm never wavering, despite the obvious fatigue in her movements. For several minutes, Eastwood stood quietly to the side, watching Sarah work. He saw how she carefully wrapped each cookie, how she wrote down every sale in her notebook, how she thanked each customer with genuine gratitude. He noticed the way her mother hovered nearby, trying to balance protection with allowing her daughter independence. A small line had formed at Sarah's stand, and Eastwood observed how she handled the pressure. Her hands might have trembled slightly as she made change, but her smile never faltered. She recited the different cookie varieties with pride, explaining how each recipe had been passed down from her grandmother. What caught his attention most was how Sarah handled a difficult customer, a hurried businessman who complained about having to wait in line for some kid's bake sale. Instead of becoming upset, Sarah simply smiled and offered him a free sample. "My grandmother always said that a good cookie can make any day better," she said, her voice steady and kind. The businessman's irritation melted away with the first bite. As the line dwindled, Eastwood made his decision. He approached the stand with the same measured pace that had carried him through decades in the entertainment industry. Sarah was counting change for another customer, focused on her task, when his shadow fell across her table. She looked up, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Recognition flickered across her face, the kind of recognition that comes from seeing someone familiar, yet seemingly impossible. Her mother, who had been watching from her usual spot, took a sharp breath. Sarah's hands froze over her money box, her eyes widening as she processed who was standing before her. The remaining customers stepped back, whispers beginning to circulate. Even Mr. Wilson, who had come out to restock the sidewalk display, stopped in his tracks. But what struck Eastwood wasn't the recognition or the growing buzz of excitement. It was how quickly Sarah composed herself, professional despite her surprise. Her hands might have been shaking slightly, but her voice was clear as she asked, "Would you like to try one of my grandmother's cookies, Mr. Eastwood?" He noted the careful arrangement of cookies before him, each variety labeled with handwritten cards. The prices were modest, the presentation simple but thoughtful. Everything about the stand spoke of dedication and care, from the neatly tied ribbons on each package to the clean, organized display. The crowd around them had grown quieter, everyone watching this unexpected encounter unfold. Some had pulled out their phones, but Eastwood's security detail, who had appeared silently nearby, discouraged any recording with subtle gestures. Sarah waited patiently for his response, her hands clasped together to hide their trembling. Her mother had moved closer, protective instincts warring with the surreal nature of the moment. The autumn breeze ruffled the tablecloth, carrying with it the sweet scent of fresh-baked cookies and the weight of possibility. Looking at the young girl before him, Eastwood saw something that resonated deeply. A fighter, someone facing overwhelming odds with grace and determination. In his long career, he'd played many tough characters, but here was real strength, wrapped in the simple courage of a child selling cookies to save her own life. The next few moments would change everything, though neither Sarah nor Eastwood knew it yet. Sometimes, the biggest turning points come disguised as small moments, and this ordinary Tuesday was about to become anything but ordinary. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as Clint Eastwood studied her cookie display. His presence, both familiar from countless movies and utterly surreal in person, made the ordinary parking lot feel like a movie set. When he finally spoke, his voice was exactly as she remembered from his films, gravelly yet gentle. "Tell me about these cookies," he said, gesturing to the display. Sarah's sales pitch, practiced hundreds of times over the past weeks, came out steady despite her nervousness. "They're my grandmother's recipes, sir. She passed them down to me before she..." She paused, took a breath. "Before she lost her battle with cancer. Now I'm fighting my own battle, and these cookies are helping me do it." Eastwood picked up one of the carefully wrapped packages, examining the blue ribbon, the color she'd chosen for childhood cancer awareness. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked, his eyes taking in every detail of her modest setup. 6 weeks, 2 days, and... Sarah glanced at her watch, smiling slightly. "About 4 hours. Every day except Sundays. Those are for treatment." She didn't mention how exhausting those treatment days were, or how she'd often spend the time planning next week's baking schedule from her hospital bed. Her mother had moved closer now, hovering protectively nearby, but Sarah barely noticed. She was focused entirely on Eastwood as he picked up another cookie package, this one containing her grandmother's famous snickerdoodles. "The cinnamon blend is secret," she explained, her voice gaining confidence. "Grandma said a good baker never reveals all her mysteries." A slight smile crossed Eastwood's face. "Smart woman, your grandmother." He paused, studying Sarah's face with the kind of intensity that had made him famous. "And how's business?" Sarah reached for her notebook, the pages now worn from constant use. "We're making progress," she said diplomatically, just as her father had taught her. But Eastwood's gaze didn't waver, and something about his genuine interest made her continue more honestly. "But the treatments are expensive. Even with insurance, there's so much that isn't covered. Dad's insurance helps, but..." She trailed off, suddenly conscious of the small crowd that had gathered at a respectful distance. Customers entering and leaving the grocery store had slowed their pace, trying to appear casual as they watched the scene unfold. Even Mr. Wilson had abandoned any pretense of restocking, watching openly from the store entrance. Eastwood seemed to notice none of this, his focus entirely on Sarah. "How many kinds of cookies do you make?" he asked, changing the subject with gentle discretion. Sarah brightened, grateful for the shift. 7 regular varieties, plus weekly specials. The chocolate chip is most popular, but the oatmeal raisin has a loyal following. My brother Tommy says it's the only way he'll eat raisins." She gestured to each type as she named them, pride evident in her voice. "And you make these all yourself?" There was something in his tone, not doubt, but curiosity. "Mom helps with the heavy mixing in the oven," Sarah admitted. "The treatments sometimes make my arms weak, but I do all the measuring and planning. Grandma always said baking is like chemistry. Every measurement has to be perfect." As she spoke, Eastwood picked up one of her business cards, simple things her father had helped her design and print at home. The blue ribbon motif was there too, along with the words, "Sarah's Hope, Cookies for a Cure." "Hope," he said, reading the card. "That's a powerful word." Sarah nodded solemnly. "Grandma said hope is like yeast. It might start small, but given the right conditions, it grows and spreads." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though we don't actually use yeast in any of our cookies." That drew a genuine chuckle from Eastwood, the sound making several onlookers gasp quietly. He studied the prices listed on her neat display cards, then looked back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Tell me, Sarah," he said, his voice lower now, meant just for her, "what's your goal here? What are you hoping to achieve with these cookies?" The question was simple, but Sarah felt its weight. She straightened in her chair, her grandmother's strength flowing through her as she answered. "I want to beat this cancer, sir. Not just for me, but for my parents who worry so much, for Tommy who pretends not to be scared, and for Grandma who fought so hard. Every cookie I sell is another step toward that goal." The parking lot had grown quiet, as if everyone within earshot was holding their breath. Even the usual traffic noise seemed muted. Eastwood stood silent for a moment, looking at the young girl before him, a child selling cookies to save her own life, facing impossible odds with grace and determination. What happened next would be talked about in their small town for years to come, but in that moment, it was just a conversation between a legendary actor and a brave young girl, connected by cookies and courage, standing at the intersection of hope and possibility. Clint Eastwood looked at the cookies displayed before him, then back at Sarah, his expression thoughtful. "How many cookies do you have left today?" he asked, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly tone that had commanded attention in countless films. Sarah quickly counted her remaining stock. 72 packages, Mr. Eastwood. Each package has 4 cookies. She didn't mention that this was more than she usually had left at this time, having baked extra in hopes of a busy day. "I'll take them all," he said simply, as if he were ordering a coffee. The quiet murmur of the watching crowd grew slightly louder, then hushed again as he continued. "And I'd like to place an advance order for tomorrow if you're baking." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her notebook. "All of them," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Her mother had stepped forward, a protective instinct drawing her closer to her daughter. Eastwood nodded, then turned to one of his security team members who was already reaching for a wallet. But Eastwood waved him off, instead pulling out his own wallet. "How much for the lot?" Sarah's mind raced through calculations, 72 packages at $5 each. $360, she said, her voice stronger now, professional despite her amazement. He pulled out $500 bills. "Keep the change," he said, then added with a slight smile. "Consider it a down payment on tomorrow's order." As Sarah carefully put the money in her cash box, Eastwood turned to her mother. "Ma'am, could we speak privately for a moment?" Rebecca Manning nodded, still looking somewhat shell-shocked. They stepped a few feet away from the stand, their conversation too quiet for others to hear. Sarah busied herself boxing up Eastwood's purchase, trying not to watch as her mother's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes as they spoke. The crowd had grown larger now, with people openly filming on their phones. Mr. Wilson had come out of his store again, this time bringing bottles of water for Sarah and her mother, his own hands shaking slightly with excitement. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, Eastwood and Rebecca returned to the stand. Sarah noticed her mother's eyes were red, but she was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in weeks. "Sarah," Eastwood said, his voice gentle but firm, "your mother tells me you've been working 6 days a week." When Sarah nodded, he continued, "Would you consider taking tomorrow off? Rest up a bit. I'd like to place my order for the day after instead." Before Sarah could protest, he added, "A good baker needs her strength. Your grandmother would want you to pace yourself." The mention of her grandmother made Sarah pause. She looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay," she agreed finally, "but I'll make them extra special for Thursday." Eastwood's security team had begun loading the boxes of cookies into the SUV, but he wasn't finished. He turned to address the crowd that had gathered, his voice carrying easily across the parking lot. "I hear these are the best cookies in town," and after trying one, he paused to take a bite of a chocolate chip cookie he'd been holding. "I have to agree, but they're more than just cookies. They're hope in every bite." The crowd murmured in agreement, and several people stepped forward to place orders for Thursday. Mr. Wilson hurried back into his store, returning with a reserved sign that he placed on Sarah's usual spot. "Your table will be waiting for you," he said, beaming. As Eastwood prepared to leave, he turned back to Sarah one last time. "You remind me of characters I've played," he said thoughtfully. "The ones who never give up, no matter the odds. Those were always my favorite roles." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "But you're braver than any character I've ever portrayed." The impact of his visit rippled through the crowd immediately. People were already on their phones, calling friends and family. Local news photographers who had arrived halfway through the encounter were snapping pictures. Social media was about to explode with the story of the legendary actor and the cookie-selling girl. But Sarah wasn't thinking about any of that. She was looking at her mother, who was still wiping away tears of joy. She was thinking about her father, who would be amazed when he heard the news. And she was thinking about her grandmother, who had always said that cookies were magic. They had a way of bringing the right people together at the right time. As Eastwood's SUV pulled away, Sarah began packing up her stand, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. The simple act of kindness from a passing stranger was about to snowball into something bigger than she could have ever imagined. The story of the girl selling cookies for her cancer treatment and the Hollywood legend who stopped to help was about to capture hearts across the nation. But for now, Sarah was just a tired young girl, holding her money box close, marveling at how life could change in an instant, all because of some cookies and a generous heart. The story exploded across social media before Sarah even made it home that day. Shaky cell phone videos of Clint Eastwood at her cookie stand went viral, shared thousands of times within hours. Local news stations interrupted their regular programming to report on the heartwarming encounter, and by dinner time, national networks were picking up the story. Sarah's phone began buzzing incessantly with notifications. Her small Instagram account, where she had been documenting her cookie journey, suddenly gained thousands of followers. People from across the country were sending messages of support, sharing their own cancer survival stories, and asking how they could help. The next morning, while Sarah took her promised day of rest, news vans lined the street outside their modest home. Rebecca Manning fielded calls from reporters, talk shows, and media outlets, all wanting to tell Sarah's story. Even Tommy became a minor celebrity at school, proudly telling anyone who would listen about how Clint Eastwood had bought his sister's cookies. Girl Battles Cancer 1. Cookie at a Time, Hollywood Legend Steps In, read one headline. Clint Eastwood's sweet gesture brings hope to young cancer patient, declared another. Local papers ran front-page stories about Sarah's journey, featuring interviews with regular customers who had been buying her cookies since the beginning. Mr. Wilson's grocery store became an impromptu tourist attraction. People drove from neighboring towns just to see where the famous encounter had taken place. His business boomed as visitors bought groceries along with their pilgrimages, and he dedicated a permanent space for Sarah's stand, complete with an awning to protect her from the elements. But the biggest surprise came when Eastwood's publicity team reached out. They had been monitoring the media coverage and were moved by how the story had touched people's hearts. Their call to the Manning household wasn't about publicity or photo ops, it was about making a difference. "Mr. Eastwood was deeply impressed by your daughter," his representative explained to Rebecca. "He'd like to help, but in a way that maintains Sarah's dignity and independence. He respects that she's working to help herself, and he doesn't want to overshadow that." The story took on new dimensions as journalists dug deeper. They discovered how Sarah had meticulously planned her cookie business, how she kept detailed records of sales and customer preferences, how she had adapted her grandmother's recipes to accommodate various dietary restrictions. Her entrepreneurial spirit, at such a young age, combined with her battle against cancer, inspired people in unexpected ways. Professional bakers began reaching out, offering to share their expertise. A local bakery volunteered their industrial kitchen for Sarah's larger orders. A cookie company executive sent her professional-grade baking equipment. But what touched Sarah most were the letters from other children fighting cancer, seeing her as a beacon of hope. Social media influencers picked up the story, creating hashtags like Yaxi, Cookies for Sarah, and Chelsea Baking Hope that trended nationally. Videos of people attempting to recreate her grandmother's recipes, never quite successfully, as Sarah kept the secret ingredients true to her grandmother's wishes, flooded TikTok and Instagram. Sarah watched it all from home, alternating between amazement and overwhelming gratitude. Her father had taken time off work to help manage the sudden attention, working with Rebecca to ensure their daughter wasn't overwhelmed. They set boundaries with the media, protecting Sarah's privacy while allowing her story to inspire others. During this whirlwind, Eastwood's team remained a steady presence, quietly helping the family navigate their newfound publicity. They provided advice on handling media requests, connected them with reputable journalists, and most importantly, helped them maintain control of Sarah's narrative. Local businesses joined the movement, setting up donation boxes and organizing fundraisers. Sarah's school started a program teaching students about entrepreneurship and community service, using her story as an example. The mayor declared an official Sarah Manning Day, encouraging citizens to support childhood cancer research. But perhaps the most significant development came when medical researchers at a prominent cancer center took notice. Sarah's story had highlighted the financial struggles many families faced during cancer treatment. Discussions began about establishing a fund to help other families in similar situations. Through it all, Sarah remained grounded. When asked by reporters about her sudden fame, she consistently redirected attention to her cause. "This isn't about me," she would say, showing wisdom beyond her years. "It's about every kid fighting cancer, every family struggling with medical bills, and every person who needs a reminder that hope is powerful." The media attention brought opportunities and challenges, but it also brought something unexpected, a sense of community that extended far beyond their small town. People united around Sarah's story, not just to help one girl sell cookies, but to be part of something bigger than themselves. As the week drew to a close, Sarah prepared to return to her cookie stand, knowing it would never be quite the same. But she was ready, armed with her grandmother's recipes, her family's support, and the knowledge that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can spark the biggest changes. A week after his initial visit, Clint Eastwood's team reached out to the Manning family with an invitation. They requested Sarah's presence at his production office, located in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town where his current project was being managed. The message was simple but carried an air of importance that made Sarah's heart race with anticipation. The morning of the meeting, Sarah sat in the back seat of her father's car, dressed in her favorite blue dress, the one that matched her trademark cookie ribbons. Her mother had helped her tie a new scarf around her head, patterned with tiny rolling pins and whisks, a gift from one of her many new supporters. As they pulled up to the building, Sarah noticed several news vans parked nearby. Despite her growing familiarity with media attention, her stomach fluttered with nerves. Her father squeezed her hand reassuringly as they were escorted inside by Eastwood's security team. The production office was a stark contrast to her humble cookie stand. Modern furniture filled the space, and large screens displayed various aspects of the film project. But what caught Sarah's attention was the smell, the unmistakable aroma of fresh-baked cookies wafting through the air. Eastwood greeted them personally, his familiar figure stepping out from behind a desk. "Hello, Sarah," he said warmly, then nodded to her parents. "Thank you all for coming." He gestured toward a conference room where several people in business attire were already seated, along with what appeared to be medical professionals. On the conference room table, Sarah was surprised to see a plate of cookies, her cookies, from the batch she had made for Eastwood the week before. "They've been a hit with the crew," he explained, noticing her glance. "But we're here to talk about something more important than cookies." As everyone settled into their seats, Eastwood remained standing. "Sarah," he began, his voice carrying that same gentle gravity she remembered from their first meeting. "Your story has touched a lot of people. But what's impressed me most is your determination to help yourself. That's a rare quality, especially in someone so young." He nodded to one of the professionals at the table, who opened a folder filled with documents. "I've been talking with some people, doctors, administrators, foundation directors. We've come up with something we'd like to propose." Sarah sat up straighter, feeling her mother's hand tighten on her shoulder. Eastwood continued, "First, I want to cover your complete treatment. Not just current expenses, but everything you'll need until you're fully recovered." He held up a hand as her parents began to protest. "This isn't charity. Consider it an investment in a promising young entrepreneur." But that wasn't all. The next part of his announcement left the Manning family speechless. We're also establishing the Sarah Manning Foundation for Childhood Cancer Support. It will help other families facing the same challenges you faced. The foundation will focus not just on medical costs, but on supporting young patients who show the same spirit you've demonstrated. The medical professionals then explained the details, how the foundation would work with hospitals nationwide, how it would identify families in need, how it would encourage young patients to maintain their dreams and ambitions despite their illness. Sarah's cookie story would be the inspiration, showing how determination and community support could create miracle. But, Eastwood added, looking directly at Sarah, we want you to be more than just a namesake. When you're feeling stronger, we'd like you to help guide the foundation. Your insight as both a patient and a young entrepreneur would be invaluable. Sarah's father cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rough. This is overwhelming. We don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me, Eastwood replied. Thank your daughter. She's the one who showed us all what real courage looks like. He turned back to Sarah. Your grandmother was right about hope being like yeast. Sometimes it just needs the right conditions to grow. The meeting continued with discussions of logistics and plans, but Sarah was already dreaming of possibilities. She thought of all the children in hospital beds, just like her, whose families were struggling with bills. She thought of her grandmother, who had always told her that helping others was the best medicine. As the meeting drew to a close, Eastwood had one final surprise. He presented Sarah with a professional baker's recipe book, bound in blue leather. For your future recipes, he said, something tells me you're going to need it. The news of the foundation broke nationally that afternoon. Social media exploded once again, this time with stories of other families sharing their struggles with childhood cancer. Sarah's cookie stand had evolved into something far bigger than anyone could have imagined, a symbol of hope, determination, and the power of community. As they drove home, Sarah clutched her new recipe book to her chest, her mind already spinning with ideas for special foundation fundraiser cookies. Her mother wiped away tears of joy, and her father kept shaking his head in amazement. Their lives had changed dramatically in just a week, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The foundation would help countless families, all because a young girl had decided to sell cookies to pay for her own treatment. As her grandmother had always said, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest impact. Sarah was beginning to understand just how true those words were. The announcement of the Sarah Manning Foundation sparked a wave of community action that surpassed anything their small town had ever seen. Local businesses, inspired by the story of cookies and kindness, began organizing their own initiatives to support the cause. What had started with one small stand outside Wilson's grocery was transforming into a movement. The town's bakeries were the first to respond. Instead of seeing Sarah as competition, they embraced her cause. The owner of Sweet Dreams Bakery created a special Sarah's Hope cookie collection, with proceeds going to the foundation. Butter and Crumb, the upscale patisserie downtown, offered to host baking workshops where Sarah could share her story and teach others her grandmother's techniques. Minus the secret ingredients, of course. Sarah's school took the initiative to new levels. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, worked with teachers to develop a program combining entrepreneurship education with community service. Students started their own fundraising projects, from art sales to talent shows, all inspired by Sarah's determination. The school cafeteria even added hope cookies to their menu, though everyone agreed they weren't quite as good as Sarah's. The local business association created a Community of Hope campaign. Shop windows displayed blue ribbons, and businesses pledged a percentage of their profits to the foundation. The town's annual festival was rebranded as the Hope and Healing Festival, with Sarah's cookie stand given a place of honor at the center of the celebrations. But it was the smaller, more personal responses that touched Sarah most deeply. Like the elderly man who walked into Wilson's grocery every morning to leave a handful of change in the foundation's donation jar, or the children who set up lemonade stands and donated their earnings. Each gesture, no matter how small, added to the growing wave of support. The town's medical community stepped up in unexpected ways. Dr. Reynolds, Sarah's oncologist, organized a network of medical professionals willing to provide pro bono services to foundation families. The hospital gift shop started stocking Sarah's cookies, and the pediatric ward was decorated with pictures of cookies and rolling pins, bringing smiles to young patients' faces. Local artists created cookie-themed merchandise, t-shirts, tote bags, and pins, with proceeds benefiting the foundation. The town's pottery studio hosted workshops where people could make their own cookie jars, each one unique and filled with hope. These items became coveted symbols of community support, worn and displayed proudly throughout the town. The impact rippled beyond their community. Neighboring towns began reaching out, asking how they could start similar programs. Sarah's story had sparked a regional movement, with communities competing to see who could raise the most support for childhood cancer research and family assistance. Sarah's high school's cooking club transformed into a foundation support group, with students learning both baking skills and the importance of community service. They organized bake sales and cookie decorating events, spreading Sarah's message of hope through hands-on activities. The club's membership tripled, with students eager to be part of the movement. Even the town's traditional events took on new meaning. The annual Christmas parade featured a cookie cart float, with Sarah and other young cancer patients riding along, throwing specially wrapped cookies to the crowd. The 4th of July celebration included a cookie baking contest judged by Sarah herself, her expertise now recognized and respected throughout the community. Local media continued to cover the story, but their focus shifted from the celebrity connection to the community's response. They highlighted different businesses and individuals each week, showcasing the various ways people were contributing to the cause. The town's newspaper created a weekly Hope Heroes column, featuring stories of community members making a difference. The town's tech community contributed by developing a website and app for the foundation, making it easier for people to donate, volunteer, and share their stories. Local developers worked overtime to create platforms that would help spread Sarah's message beyond their small town's borders. Religious organizations of all faiths joined the effort, setting up support groups for families dealing with childhood cancer. They provided practical help, meals, transportation, childcare, allowing parents to focus on their sick children. The Interfaith Council organized prayer circles and meditation groups, adding spiritual support to the community's efforts. Sarah watched all this with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Her grandmother had always told her that kindness was contagious, but she'd never imagined seeing it spread like this. Every day brought new examples of how one small act could inspire others to action. The town itself seemed transformed. People walked a little slower, smiled a little more, reached out to help others more readily. The spirit of community that had always existed grew stronger, more purposeful. Sarah's cookies had become more than just treats. They were symbols of hope, reminders that every person had the power to make a difference. As summer turned to fall, the community's support showed no signs of waning. Instead, it grew stronger, more organized, more determined to make a lasting impact. Sarah's story had given them something to rally around, but it was their own compassion and generosity that turned that rally into a revolution of kindness. Under the care of her expanded medical team, funded by the foundation bearing her name, Sarah's health began to show remarkable improvement. The aggressive treatments that had once seemed like insurmountable hurdles became manageable challenges. Her doctors noted with growing optimism that she was responding better than expected to the therapy. The change was visible in small ways at first. Her energy levels increased, allowing her to spend more time at her beloved cookie stand. The color returned to her cheeks, and though her hair hadn't grown back yet, she wore her headscarves with a new confidence, each one matching her growing collection of baking aprons. Clint Eastwood kept his word, maintaining a quiet but steady presence in Sarah's recovery. His production team regularly sent updates to the hospital staff, and he personally called every other week to check on her progress. These calls became a highlight for the entire pediatric ward, with other young patients gathering to wave at the screen during video chats. Sarah's friendship with Eastwood grew naturally, built on their shared appreciation for determination and hard work. He would often share stories from his early career struggles, drawing parallels between his persistence in Hollywood and her battle against cancer. "The trick," he told her, "is to take each day as its own scene in the movie of your life. Some scenes are harder than others, but they all move the story forward." The cookie stand remained open, though now it operated more as a symbol of hope than a necessity for medical funds. Sarah insisted on continuing to bake and sell cookies, saying it helped her feel normal and gave her purpose. Her regular customers became more like family, celebrating each small victory in her recovery journey. Tommy, who had always been Sarah's biggest supporter, appointed himself as her official taste tester and quality control manager. He took his duties seriously, carefully sampling each batch and providing detailed feedback. Their mother often found them in the kitchen, heads together, discussing the perfect balance of spices or the ideal baking time. The foundation's success exceeded everyone's expectations. Stories of families receiving help poured in from across the country. Sarah kept a bulletin board in her room covered with letters and photos from other children fighting cancer, drawing strength from their courage, just as they drew inspiration from hers. During her treatment sessions, Sarah began writing a cookbook. It wasn't just recipes, though it included many of her favorites, but also stories about her grandmother, her journey with cancer, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. Eastwood's publishing contacts expressed interest in releasing it, seeing its potential to spread hope even further. As her strength returned, Sarah started visiting other young cancer patients, bringing cookies and encouragement. She had a special way with scared children, helping them see beyond their illness to the possibilities ahead. "My grandmother always said that baking is like life," she would tell them. "Sometimes the ingredients don't seem to make sense, but you have to trust the recipe." Her own recipe for recovery included regular checkups, carefully monitored treatments, and an unwavering positive attitude. The doctors marveled at how her psychological well-being seemed to boost her physical healing. "The mind-body connection is strong in this one," her oncologist often remarked. Mr. Wilson converted a corner of his grocery store into a permanent Sarah's Cookie Corner, complete with a small seating area where customers could enjoy their treats. It became a gathering place for the community, where people shared stories of hope and healing. The walls were covered with photos documenting Sarah's journey and the foundation's impact. One particularly memorable afternoon, Sarah received news that her latest scans showed significant improvement. That same day, a young girl who had been inspired by her story had her own cancer declared in remission. The cookie stand celebrated both victories, giving away free cookies to everyone who stopped by. Eastwood arranged for Sarah to visit his film set once she was strong enough, showing her how movies were made and introducing her to the crew. She was fascinated by how many people it took to tell a story on screen, just as it had taken an entire community to support her through her illness. The road to recovery wasn't always smooth. There were still difficult days, treatments that left her tired and discouraged, but Sarah faced each challenge with the same determination that had inspired so many. Her cookie stand remained a constant, a reminder that hope, like the perfect cookie recipe, required patience and persistence. As autumn turned to winter, Sarah's prognosis continued to improve. Her story, which had begun with a simple cookie stand and an unexpected encounter with a Hollywood legend, had evolved into something far more meaningful, a testament to the power of community, kindness, and unwavering hope. Sarah's journey from patient to advocate happened gradually, like dough rising in a warm kitchen. As her strength returned, she found herself drawn to helping others facing similar battles. Her weekly visits to the children's hospital, once part of her own treatment routine, evolved into something more meaningful. Armed with baskets of cookies and a heart full of empathy, Sarah moved from room to room, sharing stories and hope with young patients. She had a special gift for connecting with children who were where she had been just months before. Her presence brought something the doctors couldn't provide, living proof that there was light at the end of the tunnel. The foundation, now operating smoothly under professional management, worked closely with Sarah to develop programs specifically designed for young patients. She insisted that each initiative should focus not just on medical support, but on helping children maintain their sense of identity beyond their illness. "We're not just fighting cancer," she would say. "We're fighting to keep dreams alive." One of her most successful initiatives was the Kitchen Therapy program. Working with child psychologists and nutritionists, Sarah helped design cooking classes for young patients well enough to participate. The simple act of creating something delicious proved therapeutic for many children, giving them a sense of accomplishment during their challenging treatments. Clint Eastwood remained involved, though he preferred to stay in the background. He would often send surprise video messages to the cooking classes, offering encouragement and sometimes playfully critiquing the results. His genuine interest in the children's progress helped maintain media attention on the foundation's work, ensuring a steady flow of support. Sarah's grandmother's recipes became the foundation for a larger collection of comfort cookies, each designed to meet specific dietary needs of cancer patients. Working with hospital nutritionists, she helped develop variations that were easy on sensitive stomachs, but still carried the magic of the original recipes. These became known as Hope's Kitchen specialties, available in hospital cafeterias across the country. The foundation's reach expanded beyond just medical support. They established scholarship programs for young cancer survivors, helping them pursue their dreams after recovery. Sarah insisted that each scholarship include a mentorship component, pairing recipients with successful professionals in their chosen fields. Tommy, inspired by his sister's work, started the support group for siblings of cancer patients. He understood firsthand the unique challenges faced by brothers and sisters of sick children, and his group provided a safe space for kids to share their feelings and experiences. Sarah would often bake special treats for their meetings, proud of her brother's initiative. The cookie stand outside Wilson's grocery remained active, though now staffed by a rotating team of volunteers when Sarah was busy with foundation work. It served as a reminder of where everything started and continued to raise funds for new foundation programs. Sarah made sure to work there at least once a week, maintaining her connection with the community that had supported her from the beginning. Eastwood's production company documented Sarah's work, creating short films about the foundation's impact that were shared at fundraising events. These heartfelt stories of hope and healing helped attract support from other celebrities and business leaders, expanding the foundation's ability to help more families. Sarah's own story became part of the medical school curriculum at several universities, used to teach future doctors about the importance of treating the whole patient, not just the disease. She was invited to speak to medical students, sharing her perspective on what makes a doctor truly helpful to a young patient. The cookbook she had started during her treatment was finally published, becoming an unexpected bestseller. More than just recipes, it was a guide to finding hope in dark times, illustrated with stories from her journey and those of other young survivors. Each copy sold helped fund another family's fight against childhood cancer. As her influence grew, Sarah remained grounded in her original purpose, helping one child at a time. She kept a journal of every young patient she visited, following up on their progress and celebrating their victories. Her mother would often find her late at night, writing encouraging notes to children she had met, always including a cookie recipe for when you're feeling stronger. The foundation's offices became a hub of activity, with Sarah's creative energy driving new initiatives. She worked with researchers to develop child-friendly ways to explain treatment protocols, designed comfort care packages for newly diagnosed patients, and established emergency support services for families suddenly facing cancer diagnoses. Through it all, Sarah's connection to the kitchen remained her center. Baking is like healing, she would tell visitors to the foundation. Both require patience, hope, and the belief that something wonderful is possible. Her grandmother's spirit lived on in every batch of cookies, in every child helped, in every family given hope. This new purpose fulfilled Sarah in ways she hadn't expected, transforming her own journey with cancer into a source of strength for others. As she often told the children she visited, sometimes, the hardest chapters of our lives become the ones that help us write someone else's happy ending. 1 year to the day after Clint Eastwood first stopped at her cookie stand, Sarah Manning stood on a stage at the newly completed Children's Cancer Wing of the Regional Medical Center. Her hair had grown back in soft curls, and she wore a chef's coat embroidered with the foundation's logo, a rolling pin wrapped in a blue ribbon. The wing, funded largely through foundation efforts and significant contributions from Eastwood and other donors, represented everything Sarah had dreamed of during her own treatment. Bright, welcoming spaces filled with natural light, a state-of-the-art teaching kitchen, and rooms designed to feel more like home than hospital. Each patient room featured a small baking station where children could participate in the kitchen therapy program that had become the foundation's trademark. Eastwood stood beside her at the podium, his presence as commanding as ever, but his usual stoic expression softened by genuine emotion. "A year ago," he began, "I stopped to buy a cookie from a brave young girl. Today, that simple encounter has evolved into something remarkable." He turned to Sarah, gesturing for her to continue the story. Sarah looked out at the assembled crowd, medical staff, foundation supporters, families helped by their programs, and most importantly, current patients and their families. Her grandmother's last cookie recipe book sat on the podium beside her, its pages worn from constant use, but still holding all the hope and love she had poured into it. "When I started selling cookies," Sarah said, her voice clear and confident, "I was just trying to help my family with medical bills, but my grandmother always said that the right recipe has a way of feeding more than just hunger. It feeds the soul." She paused, smiling at her parents and Tommy in the front row. "What we've created here is a new recipe, one for hope, healing, and community." The numbers spoke for themselves. In just 1 year, the foundation had helped over 200 families with medical expenses, established support programs in 15 hospitals across the country, and funded research into more effective, child-friendly treatment protocols. But Sarah knew the real impact couldn't be measured in statistics. It showed in the face of 8-year-old Maya, now in remission, who had learned to bake during her treatment and now volunteered teaching other young patients. It lived in the smile of 14-year-old James, who had written his college application essay about how the Foundation's scholarship program had given him a future to fight for. The teaching kitchen, named Hope's Kitchen in honor of Sarah's grandmother, had become a model for other hospitals. The program had proven so successful in helping young patients maintain their spirits during treatment that medical journals were publishing studies about its therapeutic benefits. Tommy, now running successful support groups in 3 hospitals, had grown into a passionate advocate for siblings of cancer patients. His program had become an integral part of the Foundation's family support services, helping hundreds of brothers and sisters cope with the challenges of having a sick sibling. Mr. Wilson, his grocery store now a landmark for Foundation supporters, had franchised Sarah's Cookie Corner to other locations, with proceeds supporting local childhood cancer initiatives. The original stand outside his store remained, maintained as a reminder of where it all began. Clint Eastwood's continued support had inspired other celebrities to join the cause, but he remained Sarah's most dedicated champion. His production company had created a documentary about the Foundation's work, set to premiere at major film festivals later that year. As Sarah concluded her speech, she revealed the Foundation's next initiative, a nationwide network of support centers, each equipped with teaching kitchens and staffed by professionals trained in their unique approach to helping young cancer patients. The centers would serve as gathering places for families, offering everything from cooking classes to counseling services. The ceremony ended with a ribbon cutting, but the real celebration took place in Hope's Kitchen, where Sarah and a group of young patients baked cookies using her grandmother's recipes. The familiar scent of vanilla and spices filled the air as another generation learned that hope, like the perfect cookie, requires both patience and love. Later that evening, as the last guests departed, Sarah stood in the quiet kitchen with her family and Eastwood. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said, sampling one of the day's fresh-baked cookies. "You've created something truly special here." Sarah touched the worn recipe book, thinking of all the lives touched, all the hope spread, all because of a simple cookie stand and an unexpected act of kindness. "The best recipes," she said, remembering her grandmother's words, "are the ones we share with others." As she looked around at the legacy she had helped create, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. The recipe for hope she had discovered would continue to spread, touching lives and inspiring others to believe in the power of kindness, one cookie at a time. Stories like Sarah's remind us that the most extraordinary changes can start with the simplest acts of kindness. Has a stranger's kindness ever changed your life? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories of hope and courage.